Bullies Humiliate Cashier. They didn't know she was a brutal fighter. Indy Graves moved through her shift at Megamart with the practiced invisibility of someone who had learned that being noticed usually meant being hurt. Her small frame disappeared behind the checkout counter, dark hair falling across her face like a curtain as she scanned items with mechanical precision. The fluorescent lights above cast harsh shadows under her eyes, making her appear even more fragile than her barely over 5 feet height suggested. The massive retail store sprawled across 40,000 square feet of commercial space, with Indy's register positioned near the front entrance where foot traffic was heaviest. She had worked here for 8 months, ever since moving to Millbrook after her father's death, and had perfected the art of being functionally invisible to both customers and co-workers. "Clean up on aisle 7, crackled through the overhead speakers, followed by snickering from the customer service desk, where Knox Hartwell held court with his usual crew. Knox was everything Indy wasn't. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of confident swagger that came from never having been told no. His perfectly styled hair and expensive sneakers marked him as management material, despite being barely qualified to stock shelves. "Probably another mess from our favorite little mouse," Knox said loudly enough for half the front end to hear, gesturing toward Indy's checkout lane. His companions, Paige Westfield and Damon Cross, laughed on cue like a trained audience. Indy kept scanning items, her face neutral even as heat crept up her neck. The customer in her line, an elderly woman buying groceries, glanced between Indy and Knox with obvious discomfort, but said nothing. No one ever said anything. Paige Westfield strutted over to Indy's register, her manager badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. Everything about Paige screamed authority, from her perfectly pressed uniform to the way she carried herself like she owned the place. "Indy, you're running behind on scan times again," she announced, loud enough to draw attention from nearby lanes. "I'm sorry," Indy replied quietly, never looking up from the items she was processing. "Sorry doesn't improve customer satisfaction scores," Paige continued, clearly enjoying the audience of co-workers and customers. "Maybe if you focused less on hiding behind that hair and more on doing your job properly, we wouldn't have this problem." The elderly customer shifted uncomfortably, clearly wanting to defend Indy, but uncertain how to intervene without making things worse. This was the pattern that played out daily, public humiliation disguised as workplace feedback, with witnesses who felt bad but never acted. Damon Cross appeared at Paige's shoulder, grinning like he'd won something. "Maybe she needs motivation," he suggested, reaching over the counter to flip Indy's hair back from her face. "Can't hide from customer service forever." Indy flinched at the unwanted contact, but continued scanning items. The customer paid quickly and hurried away, avoiding eye contact with everyone involved. As soon as she was gone, Knox materialized beside his friends like a shark sensing blood in the water. "You know what your problem is, Indy," Knox said conversationally, leaning against her counter. "You act like you're too good for this job, but look at you. This is probably the best you're ever going to do." The words were designed to wound, and they succeeded. But beneath the familiar sting of humiliation, something else stirred in Indy's chest. Something dangerous and patient and perfectly controlled, honed by years of training with someone who had taught her that true strength meant knowing exactly when and how to use it. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Never let them see what you're capable of until you have no other choice, warrior. The element of surprise is more powerful than any technique." Indy had been training in mixed martial arts since childhood, learning everything from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to Muay Thai from a father who had served 3 tours overseas before settling into civilian life. But Colonel James Graves was gone now, and his daughter worked at Megamart because she had nowhere else to go and no one left to protect her. "I need to get back to work," Indy said quietly, hoping they would lose interest and move on to torment someone else. But Knox wasn't finished. He picked up a bottle of soda from the impulse buy display and accidentally knocked it against the counter, sending the contents spraying across Indy's register and uniform. "Oops," he said with mock concern. "Looks like you'll need to clean that up." Paige and Damon burst into laughter, while nearby employees pretended to be busy with their own tasks. Cameron Torres, who worked in electronics and always said hello when he saw Indy, started to move toward them, but hesitated when he saw the 3-against-1 odds. "I'll get some paper towels," Indy said, her voice steady despite the sticky soda soaking through her shirt. "Good girl," Knox replied condescendingly. "Maybe now you'll pay attention to what you're doing." As Indy cleaned up the mess, she felt the familiar weight of dozens of eyes on her. Customers whispered to each other, employees exchanged glances, and security cameras captured every moment of her humiliation. But she endured it all with the discipline her father had drilled into her, because fighting back would mean losing the only job she could find, the only income she had. The harassment continued throughout her shift. Knox and his crew found excuses to visit her register, each interaction designed to establish dominance and remind everyone watching of their place in the store's social hierarchy. Paige criticized her posture, her speed, her customer interaction skills. Damon accidentally bumped into her while she was counting her till, sending coins scattering across the floor. During her 15-minute break, Indy retreated to the employee parking lot, where she sat in her beat-up Honda and allowed herself exactly 3 minutes of tears before forcing them back. She couldn't afford to be emotional. Emotion was weakness, and weakness invited more predation. "You okay?" The voice startled her, and she looked up to see Cameron Torres standing beside her car with genuine concern in his dark eyes. Indy quickly wiped her face, embarrassed to be seen crying. "I'm fine." "No, you're not," Cameron said gently. "Those guys are jerks. Someone should report them to corporate." "It wouldn't matter," Indy replied, rolling down her window so they could talk properly. "Knox's uncle owns 3 franchises. Paige is being fast-tracked for district management. Damon's girlfriend works in HR." Cameron's expression darkened with understanding. "That's not right." "Right doesn't matter here," Indy said, surprised by how easy it was to talk to him. "Survival does." Cameron studied her face with the kind of attention that made Indy feel actually seen for the first time in months. "You're tougher than you look," he observed. If only he knew, Indy thought, but she just smiled sadly. "I have to be." The next few weeks brought escalating incidents. Knox began timing his breaks to coincide with hers, cornering her in the employee break room to deliver lectures about her attitude problem while she tried to eat lunch. Paige started assigning her the worst shifts and most difficult customers, then criticizing her performance when things went badly. The worst part wasn't the harassment itself, but watching how other employees responded to it. They would look away when Knox was being cruel, suddenly find urgent tasks elsewhere when Paige was humiliating her, pretend not to hear when Damon made crude comments about her appearance. Cameron was the only exception. He started eating lunch at the same time as Indy, sitting with her in the break room as a silent buffer against Knox's worst behavior. He brought her coffee when her shift started early, helped her reach high shelves when she was stocking returns, and treated her like a human being worthy of basic respect. "You don't have to do this," Indy told him one afternoon as they shared a table in the break room. "Being nice to me isn't going to make you any friends here." "I'm not looking for friends," Cameron replied. "I'm looking for decent people to work with. Those are much rarer." Something warm bloomed in Indy's chest, unfamiliar after months of isolation and cruelty. Cameron's kindness was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, and she found herself looking forward to work for the first time since starting at Megamart. That's when Knox decided to escalate. Well, Knox announced loudly as he entered the break room where Indy and Cameron were sitting together. "Look what we have here. The charity case found herself a boyfriend." Page and Damon flanked him like attack dogs, their expressions gleeful with anticipation. Other employees in the break room looked up from their phones and lunches, sensing drama about to unfold. "Leave us alone, Knox," Cameron said firmly, but Indy could hear the tension in his voice. "Or what?" Knox challenged, moving closer to their table. "You'll report me to management? Good luck with that, hero." Damon laughed. "Maybe we should let corporate know that their employees are getting a little too friendly during work hours. Wouldn't want anyone to think there's fraternization happening." The threat was clear. If Cameron continued defending Indy, they would find a way to get him fired too. Indy watched his face change as he realized the impossible position they had put him in. "It's okay," she whispered to Cameron. "Just ignore them." But Knox wasn't satisfied with mere intimidation. He walked around behind Indy's chair, close enough that she could smell his cologne and feel the heat radiating from his body. "You know what I think," he said conversationally. "I think our little mouse here is taking advantage of good-hearted people, playing the victim to get sympathy." Page nodded sagely. "Some people will do anything to avoid actually working for what they want." The words hit their target perfectly. Indy had been working since she was legally able, had put herself through community college while caring for her dying father, had never asked anyone for anything she hadn't earned. But explaining that would require revealing parts of her life she kept private, and privacy was one of the few things she had left. "I work hard," she said quietly. "Do you?" Knox asked, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're coasting on other people's kindness." He placed his hands on the back of her chair, effectively trapping her in place. "Cameron here probably thinks he's being noble, defending the poor little girl who can't stand up for herself. But what happens when he realizes you're not worth the trouble?" Cameron started to stand, but Page moved to block him. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," she said sweetly. "Unless you want to explain to management why you're getting aggressive with your supervisors." Indy felt the trap closing around both of them. Knox was using Cameron's feelings for her as a weapon, forcing him to choose between protecting her and protecting his own job. It was a sophisticated form of cruelty that went beyond simple bullying into psychological warfare. "Please," Indy said, the word barely audible. "Just leave us alone." "Please what?" Knox demanded, leaning down so his face was inches from hers. "Please stop pointing out the truth. Please stop making you face reality." The break room had gone completely silent, except for the hum of the vending machines and the distant sound of shopping carts in the store beyond. Everyone was watching, waiting to see how far this would go, but no one was moving to intervene. That's when Knox made his fatal mistake. As Indy tried to stand and leave, he placed his hand on her shoulder and shoved her back down into the chair with enough force to make her gasp. "We're not finished here," he said, his voice low and threatening. But they were finished. More finished than Knox could possibly imagine, because in that moment, Indy felt something snap inside her chest like a wire under too much tension. Her father's voice whispered one final time, "When someone puts their hands on you, warrior, all bets are off." The change in Indy was subtle at first, barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for. Her breathing slowed and deepened. Her posture shifted almost imperceptibly. The trembling in her hands stopped completely. She looked up at Knox with eyes that no longer held fear or shame, but something much more dangerous. "Take your hand off me," she said quietly. Knox laughed, applying more pressure to keep her pinned in the chair. "Or what, little mouse? What are you going to do about it?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around the break room, employees held their breath, some part of them sensing that something fundamental was about to shift. Indy moved with fluid precision that seemed to slow time itself. One moment, Knox was looming over her with his hand on her shoulder, and the next moment he was face down on the break room floor with his arm twisted behind his back at an angle that made everyone watching wince in sympathetic pain. "What the hell?" Damon started forward, but froze when Indy's eyes met his. Something in her gaze suggested that approaching would be a very bad idea. Knox struggled against her grip, his face red with pain and outrage. "Let me go! You're crazy!" "You put your hands on me first," Indy said calmly, applying just enough pressure to keep him still without causing permanent damage. "In front of 12 witnesses with security cameras recording everything." Paige backed away instinctively. "Knox, get up! Do something!" "I can't move," Knox gasped, genuine fear creeping into his voice for the first time. "She's going to break my arm." Indy looked around the break room at faces that were staring at her with shock and dawning respect. These people had watched Knox torment her for months, had seen Paige humiliate her daily, had witnessed Damon's crude behavior without ever speaking up. Now they were seeing the consequences of their inaction. "For 8 months," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "You've all watched them treat me like garbage. You've seen them harass me, humiliate me, make my life miserable every single day. And what did you do?" She shifted her grip slightly, causing Knox to whimper. "You looked away. You found excuses to be somewhere else. You pretended not to see or hear what was happening because it wasn't your problem." Cameron was staring at her with amazement and something that might have been admiration. "Indy, how did you—" "My father taught me," she said simply. "Before he died, he made sure I could protect myself when no one else would." Damon took another step forward, perhaps thinking he could overwhelm her while she was focused on holding Knox. It was exactly the wrong decision. Without releasing Knox, Indy swept Damon's legs out from under him, sending him crashing into a table with enough force to scatter chairs and spill coffee everywhere. "Stay down," she advised mildly, as Damon groaned on the floor. "Unless you want to join your friend in learning about consequences." And Paige was frantically pushing buttons on her phone, probably trying to call security or management. "You're finished here," she snarled. "I'll have you arrested for assault." "Really?" Indy asked conversationally. "Because I'm pretty sure these security cameras show Knox putting his hands on me first, then refusing to stop when I asked him to. That's textbook self-defense." She looked around the room again, meeting the eyes of co-workers who had failed her when she needed them most. "How many of you recorded what just happened? How many of you have videos on your phones that show exactly who the aggressor was?" Guilty glances were exchanged as people realized their instinct to document drama had created evidence that would exonerate Indy completely. Knox was still struggling weakly against her hold, but the fight had gone out of him. The confident bully who had tormented her for months was now flat on his belly, controlled completely by the small, quiet girl he had underestimated so catastrophically. "I could hurt you right now," Indy told him, her voice calm and educational. "I could dislocate your shoulder, hyperextend your elbow, cause permanent damage that would affect you for the rest of your life. Do you know why I'm not doing that?" Knox didn't answer, but she continued anyway. "Because hurting people doesn't make you stronger. It just makes you like them." She released his arm and stepped back, allowing him to scramble to his feet while cradling his injured limb. Knox looked around the break room with wild eyes, perhaps hoping his friends would help him salvage some dignity from the situation. But Damon was still picking himself up off the floor, and Paige was too busy trying to figure out how to spin this disaster to their advantage. The other employees were watching Knox with new eyes, seeing him not as a powerful figure to fear, but as someone who had been completely outmatched by his victim. "This isn't over," Knox said, his voice lacking any conviction. "Yes," Indy replied firmly, "it is. Because if you ever touch me again, if you harass Cameron, if you target anyone else the way you targeted me, I will make sure everyone in this company knows exactly what kind of person you really are. She looked directly at Paige. That includes management, who enable this behavior, and HR representatives who protect bullies instead of employees. The threat was clear and backed by video evidence that would be impossible to suppress or explain away. Knox's position in the company, his uncle's franchises, Paige's management track record, even Damon's girlfriend in HR. None of it mattered now that everyone had seen the real dynamic at work. Cameron found his voice first. "That was incredible," he said, genuine awe in his tone. "I mean, I'm sorry it came to that, but watching you take control." Indy felt heat rise in her cheeks, but it was good heat this time. The warmth of being seen and appreciated rather than mocked and diminished. "I should have done it sooner." "No," Cameron replied, standing to move closer to her. "You did it exactly when you needed to, when you had no other choice." Knox was still standing there, looking lost and uncertain without his usual power dynamics to rely on. For a moment, Indy almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Knox," she said, her voice gentler than anyone expected, "you don't have to be like this. Whatever made you think it was okay to treat people the way you've treated me, it doesn't have to define who you are." The words seemed to hit Knox harder than any physical technique could have. For just a moment, his mask slipped and everyone saw something that looked almost like shame in his eyes. Over the following days, the change in Megamart's social ecosystem was dramatic and immediate. Knox called in sick for the rest of the week, then returned with a subdued demeanor that his former victims found almost unrecognizable. Paige transferred to another location without explanation. Damon requested a schedule change that eliminated most of his interaction with other employees. More importantly, other staff members began treating Indy differently. Not with fear, but with genuine respect and something approaching friendship. The co-workers who had ignored her harassment now made efforts to include her in conversations and activities. "I owe you an apology," said Maria from customer service during a shared break. "I saw what they were doing to you, and I should have said something. I was just scared of becoming their next target." Indy nodded, understanding. "Fear makes us all smaller than we really are. The important thing is recognizing it and choosing to do better." Cameron became a constant presence in her life, not just as someone who was kind to her, but as someone who genuinely seemed to value her company. They discovered shared interests in books, movies, and dreams for the future that went far beyond retail work. "I keep thinking about what you said in there," Cameron told her one evening as they walked to their cars after closing. "About how hurting people doesn't make you stronger. Where did that come from?" Indy was quiet for a moment, organizing her thoughts. "My father used to say that the strongest people are the ones who can stop themselves from using their full strength. Anyone can cause damage. It takes real power to show restraint." "He sounds like a wise man." "He was," Indy agreed. "I just wish I could tell him that I finally understood what he meant." 3 months later, Knox approached Indy during a slow afternoon shift. She tensed instinctively, her body preparing for conflict, even though he showed no signs of aggression. "I wanted to apologize," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure they weren't being overheard, "not just for that day in the break room, but for everything. The way I treated you, it was wrong." Indy studied his face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. Instead, she found something she'd never seen before: genuine remorse. "Why?" she asked. Knox was silent for a long moment. "Because after what happened, I had to look at myself differently, had to ask why I thought it was okay to make someone else feel small, just so I could feel big. And I didn't like the answers I came up with. What are you going to do about it?" "Be better," Knox said simply. "Try to be the kind of person who builds people up instead of tearing them down." Indy nodded slowly. That's all any of us can do. As Knox walked away, Indy realized that the story wasn't just about her transformation from victim to someone who refused to be victimized. It was about how standing up for yourself could change an entire environment, forcing everyone involved to examine their own behavior and choices. She never forgot what it felt like to be powerless, and she made sure that knowledge informed how she used her strength going forward. The girl who had once apologized for existing now helped others find their voices, always remembering that true power wasn't about dominating others, but about refusing to let others dominate you. The most important lesson hadn't come from her father's training or her own courage, but from understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show others that fighting back doesn't require losing your humanity in the process. Strength, real strength, was knowing when to fight and when to stop, when to defend and when to forgive, when to use your power and when to restrain it. Standing behind her checkout counter now, Indy carried herself with quiet confidence that had nothing to do with her job title or her circumstances. She had learned that respect wasn't something you could demand or steal. It was something you earned by refusing to accept anything less than basic human dignity for yourself and others.